When the call came in, I was nursing a bitter coffee and an even bitterer mood. Detective Thorne, the voice crackled through my phone. We've got a high-profile one. Midtown. Fashion show. CEO of Crescendo, Layla Kensington dead. Layla Kensington. Even if you weren't into fashion, you knew the name. She had a reputation that could freeze water in midair. A visionary to some, a tyrant to many more. Crescendo wasn't just a brand. It was a global institution, synonymous with exclusivity, power, and the kind of money that made morals optional. I was on the scene in 20 minutes, my unmarked car screeching to a halt in front of the Monolith Hotel. The rooftop venue where Crescendo's latest runway show had taken place was still ablaze with strobe lights, casting an eerie glow over the sea of expensive shoes and panicked faces. The air was thick with perfume and panic. Models huddled together, their makeup streaked from tears, and industry bigwigs whispered furiously into their phones. The chaos was barely contained by the line of uniformed officers holding back the press, whose cameras flashed like a barrage of gunfire. "Thorne!" Officer Ramirez waved me over, her expression grim. She led me through the throng and into the heart of the scene. Layla Kensington's body lay sprawled at the edge of the runway, a grotesque juxtaposition against the shimmering, avant-garde gown she wore. The gown was unmistakable, a metallic masterpiece that had been the show's centerpiece, now marred with crimson. A jagged shard of glass jutted from her chest, and the blood pooling beneath her sparkled under the lights like rubies. "Glass shard?" I asked, crouching down to get a closer look. "From the centerpiece sculpture," Ramirez replied. "It was an abstract piece, some kind of jagged crystal installation. Fell over during the chaos. Or was pushed. Witnesses?" Ramirez shook her head. Too many conflicting accounts. Everyone was focused on the finale. The lights dimmed, the music swelled, and then she screamed. By the time anyone noticed, she was already. Ramirez's voice trailed off, her eyes flicking to the body. "Where's the designer? The one who made this gown?" I asked, gesturing to Layla's blood-soaked masterpiece. "Right over there," Ramirez said, pointing toward a pale, trembling man clutching a champagne flute like it was a life raft. "Mr. Devereaux," I said, approaching him. "I'm Detective Sam Thorne. I'd like to ask you a few questions." Devereaux's eyes darted around like a cornered animal. I don't know what happened. It's a tragedy, an absolute tragedy. She was a force of nature. That much I've heard. Can you tell me about the sculpture?" He hesitated, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. It was her idea. Layla wanted something dramatic, something dangerous. She thrived on risk. And did she have enemies? People who might have wanted her, out of the picture? Devereaux's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Detective, in this industry, enemies are a sign you're doing something right." Layla had plenty. Designers she'd blacklisted, partners she'd outmaneuvered. But she didn't care. She was untouchable. Or so she thought. Blacklisted designers? Anyone in particular stand out? Devereaux's face froze, and for a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly he said, "Isabelle Laurent. She was a rising star a few years ago." "Layla." Well, let's just say Isabelle's designs bore an uncanny resemblance to some of Crescendo's biggest hits. Isabelle accused Layla of theft, but Layla crushed her. Sued her into oblivion. And where is Isabelle now? Devereaux shrugged. "Who knows? She disappeared after the lawsuit. Haven't heard her name in years." I nodded, filing that away. "Thank you, Mr. Devereaux. Don't leave town." The next stop was Layla's office, a glass-walled fortress overlooking the venue. The place was a shrine to opulence, every surface gleaming, every detail meticulously curated. But what caught my eye wasn't the decor. It was the sketchbook lying open on her desk. The designs were stunning, no question about it. But as I flipped through the pages, a pattern began to emerge. The lines, the details, they felt familiar. Too familiar. I snapped photos of the sketches and sent them to the precinct's tech team. "Run these against any public records for Isabelle Laurent," I told them. "I need to know if there's a match." As I left the office, my phone buzzed. It was Ramirez. "Thorne, you're going to want to see this." Security footage from the runway. Back in the control room, Ramirez played the clip. The video was grainy, but clear enough. Layla's final moments played out in a grotesque ballet. The lights dimmed, the music swelled, and then a shadow moved behind the sculpture. A figure in black, almost indistinguishable from the crowd, but unmistakably deliberate in their movements. The sculpture toppled, and the shadow vanished. "Freeze it," I said, leaning closer. The figure's face was obscured, but there was something about their stance, their stride of familiarity I couldn't place. The tech team pinged my phone. Detective Thorne, we've got a match. Isabel Lawrence early designs. They're identical to Layla's recent collection. Line for line. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Isabel Lauron wasn't just a ghost from Layla's past. She was the shadow in the present. And if I didn't move fast, she'd vanish again, this time for good. Get me her last known address, I barked at Ramirez. Already dialing her phone, Ramirez gave me a curt nod. On it. I was halfway to the elevator when her voice called after me. Thorne, Tech says she bought a one-way ticket to Paris. Her flight leaves in 2 hours. I didn't stop to acknowledge the information. If Isabel Lauron thought she could skip town and start fresh in the fashion capital of the world, she was in for a rude awakening. An hour later, I was at JFK, weaving through terminals, my badge flashing like a strobe light. The boarding gate for the Paris flight was a sea of sleek luggage and tailored trench coats. Isabel wouldn't stand out here, unless you knew what to look for. And I did. She was seated at the far end of the gate, her head bowed over a phone, a wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over her face. But it wasn't the hat or the phone that gave her away. It was the bag slung over her shoulder. A leather tote embossed with the unmistakable Crescendo logo. I approached carefully, sliding into the seat beside her before she even realized I was there. Isabel Lauron, I said, keeping my voice low. Her hand froze mid-scroll, but she didn't look up. You must have the wrong person. Funny, I said, pulling out my phone and showing her a still frame from the security footage. Because this looks a lot like you. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might run. But then she exhaled sharply and leaned back, her hat tilting just enough to reveal her face. It was angular, beautiful, and tired, a face that had once graced the pages of fashion magazines before Layla Kensington had turned her life into a cautionary tale. So, she said finally, her voice cool but laced with a tremor. You found me. I did. And now you're going to tell me why. Her lips twitched into something between a smirk and a grimace. You already know why, Detective. Layla stole my work, my reputation, my life. And when I tried to fight back, she crushed me. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To be erased? I'm not here to talk about your past, I said. I'm here to talk about what you did tonight. Her eyes met mine, defiant. What I did tonight? Layla's death was an accident. You expect me to believe that? You were seen on the footage, Isabel. You pushed that sculpture? She shook her head vehemently. I didn't push it. I was trying to pull it back, stop it from falling. But someone else was there. Someone bumped into me, hard, and the next thing I knew, the sculpture was crashing down. I studied her, searching for cracks in her story. But if she was lying, she was a damn good actress. Who? I pressed. Who was there? I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. It was dark, and everything happened so fast. But I think it was someone from her team. One of her assistants, maybe. I recognized the silhouette. Describe them. She hesitated, then said, tall. Slim. Short hair. Male. He was wearing black, like everyone else. Devereaux. The thought hit me like a freight train. He'd been cagey earlier, quick to point fingers but vague on details. And now that I thought about it, he'd been conspicuously close to the sculpture when I'd arrived on the scene. I stood abruptly, pulling out my phone. Ramirez, I need Devereaux brought in for questioning. Now. Isabel's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. You have to believe me, Detective. I didn't want Layla dead. I just wanted justice. I pulled away, my mind already racing ahead. Stay here, Isabel. If you try to board that plane, you'll regret it. By the time I got back to the precinct, Devereaux was in an interrogation room, his perfect composure fraying at the edges. His champagne flute had been swapped for a styrofoam coffee cup, and his tailored suit looked slightly less pristine under the harsh fluorescent lights. You've been busy tonight, I said, dropping into the chair across from him. First, the dramatic runway show. Then, the accusations against Isabel Lauron. Now, I hear you might have had a hand in Layla Kensington's death. Devereaux's eyes widened, but he quickly masked his surprise with indignation. That's absurd. I had nothing to do with Layla's death. Really? Because witnesses place you near the sculpture before it fell. And Isabel Lauron says she saw someone matching your description push past her in the moments leading up to the incident. She's lying, he spat. She has every reason to pin this on me. She hated Layla. True, I said, leaning forward. But so did you. You were tired of living in her shadow, weren't you? Tired of her taking credit for your work, treating you like a glorified errand boy. Devereaux's face darkened, his carefully curated facade finally cracking. You don't know what it was like working for her. She was a tyrant, a leech. She bled me dry. So you decided to end it, I said. Once and for all. His silence was answer enough. The confession came later, after hours of back and forth. Devereaux had snapped under the pressure of years of exploitation, seizing the opportunity when chaos reigned on the runway. But his plan to make it look like an accident had been sloppy, and Isabel Lawrence's unexpected presence had complicated things further. As I watched him being led away in cuffs, I thought about Isabel, still sitting in the airport, waiting for a future she wasn't sure she deserved. Justice had been served, but the industry Layla Kensington had built would carry on, as cutthroat and unforgiving as ever. Fashion, like murder, was a brutal business. And tonight, both had proven deadly.